How's everybody doing?
Just beginning of the week.
Yep,
One
just
of
getting
those-
going again.
One of those Monday kind of Tuesdays, and yeah, feeling the same way. I'm frantically scrolling through some of the distribution code to find some of the auth implementation in there. Are there folks more familiar with it than me that want to present about it and talk about what happens over there? Otherwise, it's a bit of a blind leading blind.
Was there anything on the agenda? We didn't add anything, did we?
We didn't add a specific agenda, but from last time, what we said we would do this week was to look at some of the distribution code. Unless folks have other things they want to talk about. I'm not particular.
I just had a question. Is there anybody from Docker who can comment if we can take portions of the Docker specification and move it into this working group as a proposal, and then strip out parts that maybe is specific? I mean, we've done that. It's been done before, right? So
I was having another conversation internally about that, of literally, yeah, but let's do that as a starting point, and then we can just start commenting against it. And then, yeah, like you said, pulling out the parts that don't make sense and or adding in things that it doesn't cover, but at least we have a starting point to go off of, which it isn't going to be an exact representation of what everyone else does, but at least is going to be probably a close approximation of what many registries adhere to.
the good thing about that is you start getting specific feedback, right? Like, okay, this field is here, not here. V2 is not required or optional, and those discussions don't happen without a draft in some form. So that's why I was thinking if we can get the Docker specs as a baseline, and then we go with that.
Yeah, I don't see why we couldn't do that. Would probably be a good place to start. What we need to do to kind of get that into shape and or reformat or whatever, I don't know, but.
I don't know. Do folks have a suggestion? I think most of the time, just getting one markdown with everything in there might be the easiest one. Or do you want to break it up? Brandon, Ramkumar, do you folks have any take on that? Like, should we just do like one proposal with that, or
Yeah, I think one proposal is reasonable, just like distribution spec.md, right? So so a single document is probably better, I think. Just my opinion.
At some point, we're hoping to turn this into a pull request and a distribution spec. So I'm
Correct.
imagining it's, I don't know if it's a single file over there, but yeah, I'm hoping that it keeps to be something that's not too expansive in a lot of different places.
And another output of this work would be, I'm guessing would be more conformance tests coming out of here. So there is that too.
Does anybody remember where in the distribution code that v2 ping happens? Or was that over in Docker code?
should be in client?
Hmm?
I mean, you mean in the on the containerd side, right?
No, I don't think it's in distribution. I think it might
Okay.
be something else.
I mean, there is auth code in there handling this, but I thought the ping was in there, and there's stuff about a ping. I just don't see the v2 ping specifically there.
This is the Brandon. This is the client code, right?
Yeah, and distribution has client code in there. Get this up so I can share.
Isn't that used only for the mirror or the proxy?
It might be. I might need to go digging into, I don't know if it's Moby or containerd I might need to dig into. But yeah, we've got some of this over here. And when I switch my screen, it cut off my left-hand side, but I'm in distribution client auth session code here. Or it is talking about like a ping path. Okay, well, it does say v2 root. There was the v2. Yeah, the part that I was trying to look up is what I remember from looking at this code a while back, which is that the current workflow that happens is for every request to a registry, it first queries the V2 path to see, does that return back with an authentication request? And then based off of that, there was other code in there that would do a construction of the field itself. And so whenever you requested something like a token or something like that, it built the scope out and other stuff directly in here. So I don't know if that's still in there or if that is.
No,
Other-
Happy Path, the root v2 is generally only used for like the Docker login call. So that's not used on a Happy Path normal poll basis. That's essentially used in the real world as a, hey, someone's running a Docker login, let me just validate that the credentials are valid. I'm not trying to pull anything, I'm not trying to push anything, just let me test the basic auth against some endpoint that does nothing. So that's essentially what the v2 ping does. In the real world, you actually straight do your normal request. You actually try to, you hit the endpoints to pull the manifest, to pull the blob, whatever you're doing. And the registry will do the 401 redirect. After you do the login, the v2 ping stuff is not needed, and really it's never really needed. It's just used by the client, but it's not really part of the spec anyway.
From what I was reading back in the day, the reason for hitting the v2 path was that it was deciding whether or not it needed to do token authentication versus basic authentication, and if it was token authentication, what server. And so maybe it's changed since I last looked at it, or maybe I just misread it. But I was under the impression that they were actually building out the actual scope and other stuff in there. You know, it's building out whatever actions and whatnot in there for the scope and generating that scope for you. That was being constructed inside the code, and then that was being used to do the actual authentication for any individual request.
If some people are doing that, that's not the most common use case, but I'm not going to say that some people aren't doing that.
Yeah, I feel like, Ram, you were looking at some of this a while back. Did you see that other places? So I know you were asking me earlier about whether the 401 versus 403 on the V2 API versus hitting the blob directly.
Yeah, so I mean, we were dealing with this stuff in Zod, specifically with regards to multi-tenancy and anonymous access and things like that. So, some users may come in, they can get anonymous access to some repos, but not for others. So having the V2 ping be a selector for that kind of behavior was a little tricky for us. But we somehow managed to get around it, but that was not so that's why for a multi-tenant access, I think this sort of is a little bit of a gray area, this bootstrapping everything out of V2.
Yeah, I feel like what I had seen was that the V2 wasn't doing the full tenancy. It was just saying this registry server uses this token server. And so it was using it to know where it needed to do the rest of the authentication request. So I'm not sure how much I'm misremembering. That's why I was trying to go back to the code and find some of it. And I'm seeing pieces of it here where they're talking about generating the repository scope. And they're generating it based off of the repository, the actions. They're building out a string there. So that code does exist. I'd have to go digging and see how it's used. Like I say, I didn't do much preparation this week.
Well, but I think last week we had made kind of we kind of, I don't necessarily agreed on or decided, but had the viewpoint of the client really shouldn't be doing anything. We should let the server tell us what we need to do. So the client shouldn't be trying to, generate the auth request, shouldn't be trying to figure out what it needs to ask for. We should ask the registry should say, here's a request to, send to the auth server. So even if this does exist, it kind of goes against what maybe we want it to be.
Yeah, the path I'm taking is to document how it works today. So that's what I wanted to capture was what does the code look like today? Who's doing what API calls? And that way you make sure whatever we create doesn't get broken by what's happening on existing systems.
You scroll down a bit, there is do basic auth to refer auth, and it calls out like how the strings are concatenated in the better auth section for the scopes and things like that. So
That's an assumption I've seen made a lot of places, is that the registry is going to give the same challenge back, at least the token server and whatnot. You wouldn't get basic auth on one URL and token server somewhere else and a different token server on another repo. All the repos are going to give you back the same token server.
yeah, that's actually a good thing to call out, that at the registry level, there is technically only one token server at this point, or at least what it is right now. You can change the spec to add support and things like that if somebody does implement it or want it. But I've never seen a reason for multiple yet. What does Zot want to do in terms of V2 for multi-tenancy? What's the thinking?
Yeah, that is not so we are followers of what is out there, right, currently. But ideally, we want to reach a place where the decision making is not rooted at V2. So each repo has its own decision with regards to authentication or access control and things like that. Because the clients can just reach out to a particular repo and start working off it, right? So yeah, so that's that would be ideal, but it's not clear yet.
I think that's fair. I mean, if you want to recommend what you want clients to do, what you're saying is when you would like, I mean, I'm just throwing this out there. As a part of the challenge for the repository, you want to see the endpoint where you can get the token from, or like if you get a 404 or 405 at that repo.
Correct. Yes. For example, yes.
So to put it shortly, eliminate the requirement to go to V2.
That is like that yeah, in a way, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and they're doing some deduplication. Which means it's not just blindly taking whatever they see in the scope, they're parsing it and figuring out what it needs to be.
Canonicalization of scopes is not done at this point, right?
Oh, they're saying they're
Just
unaware
in
of the scope
comparison on
grammar.
that. Only thing they've inverted is push pull versus pull push.
Yeah, they're saying they don't. I thought this was saying they do. You're right. And it would take me time to go through and dig through, see all the full workflow of this. Given that I didn't prepare too much for that one, are there things other people want to discuss today? Or are we all coming back from a holiday weekend without a lot of detail?
I know it's not there on the. I didn't put it on the agenda. Actually, I was more curious on what do we collectively agree to do, like next steps, in the sense of like, is there a time window for this, or
I'm
what
not
about
willing
this
to
thing?
commit to a time window because I'm still trying to get past the time window some people committed to for previously on the other specs. So I'm not ready for that.
What about immediate items? Like, say, for example, if we wanted to do the spec port over from Docker, get a PR into the working group, 3 to 4 weeks, or do we want to extend it more? Nothing immediate, but more like what's the plan of action is what I'm wondering at this point.
I think the question you're trying to ask is who has bandwidth to do how much work right now?
Right.
Nada, at least for me.
Okay. What I'll at least do is create an issue about, let's take the first cut of the Docker spec and then port it over. And maybe by next call, if anybody wants to think about it, maybe people will get enough eyes on it. Is that fair?
Are you saying you're offering to do that?
No, I'm not volunteering.
Are you asking for someone to volunteer to do that?
No, I'll make the issue. That's easier. So at least we'll start with somebody documenting the fact that what we want to do. I think knocking it off one at a time is going to be hard, but it's at least we can chat on the issue as to, okay, this maybe one doc, multiple docs and things like that. Coming back to notes and seeing it is going to be hard. So at least there's some documentation. I'm saying start small, start with an issue, and then we kind of build on it, and hopefully people will want to pick up.
Yeah, I think right now we're at the point nobody has any bandwidth for this right now, unfortunately.
No, fair enough. I think that's fine.
So given that, anything else we want to do with our time today, or should we give everybody back 30 minutes since we don't have the bandwidth anyway?
I'll take a small action item to just create the issue, point to the specifications that's already been linked, right? Like there are 4 specifications that got linked in. I'll put a point in there. See if we can discuss on that maybe by next week.
The item that I still want to have on there is still looking through the distribution or container, whatever code is being used today by a good number of these runtimes to work that workflow. So that's still an action item that I'd like to knock out. I just need to find the bandwidth.
Right.
And if someone else has bandwidth, I'm more than happy to delegate that to someone else. All right. So on that note, until next week or next Thursday, folks that'll join that one. Give people back a little bit of time.
All right. Thanks, folks.
Cool. Talk to everybody later.